right, everybody, welcome here to show 177 on Crypto Voices. Matthew here from the Baltics, as always, joined by my buddy Alec Harris from Halo Privacy in the Eastern U.S. Alec, what's up?
Hey, fellas. I'm looking forward to this one. This is going to be good.
Yeah, myself as well. We're very happy to have Ryan McBeth here join us today. YouTuber, defense expert, former soldier. Ryan, welcome. Anything else you want to add there, just for our listeners?
Oh boy! Well, I'm also a. Did you say I was a software engineer? I do a lot of work for the Texas Aero Med Lab, where we use AI-powered drones to deliver whole blood to wounded soldiers. In fact, I'm down in Texas right now looking for new office space. It's a tall order because I got to find a warehouse and I have to find like offices, and they have to be like within our price range. So it's a Texas-sized problem, I'll tell you that.
Well, we have a lot of Texas Bitcoiners who listen, so maybe you'll hear some people who could find some common ground there from this. But yeah, great to have you on. Really enjoy all of your shorts, all of your videos. Just someone who, we're more politics, economics, things like that. Privacy as well, for sure. But, disinformation, tracking this stuff is definitely what Alec does as well at his day job. But adding on the military layer is really interesting. And yeah, you said you had like 4 or 5 jobs in different areas of expertise. So it's going to be great to pick your brain about a few of these things this morning. Listen, I just want to get right into it. My listeners, I'm a broken record on this by now, talking about Russia and Ukraine from my vantage point. Let's just start with why people refuse to believe that someone like Putin is a dictator. I found, and I don't live in the U.S. anymore, but I found that if you're talking about, for example, like Xi or Kim Jong-un or the supreme leader, it's pretty clear that these are dictator-like figures for sure, no matter how you want to spin it. But for some reason, Putin and Russia, he has this sort of aura, in my view, for many on, let's say, the right in the U.S., that he's some kind of a democratically elected leader and he's protecting his people and he's just, maybe a little bit of strong man, but he's not a dictator after 25 years. What's your read on this situation?
So I don't think that's the case at all. I think that it's people know he's a dictator and they're okay with it. And when you think about it, if you're living in an authoritarian society and you are towing the line, and that sort of life is pretty darn good. It's the people that don't particularly agree with the party line, those are the ones that get in trouble. And once in a while, there might be a purge or something like that. But it's really easy, especially if you're in the West, to look at an authoritarian type leader and kind of wish for something like that. Kind of go, you know what? It would be great if our president was as strong as I see Vladimir Putin. But I think that unless you actually live under those particular conditions where you don't really have a freedom of speech or your travel is restricted, unless you live under those conditions, you don't really understand the major changes that you have to make just to live your life. And if you do live under those conditions, you get used to them. And that's what's kind of scary, right? Like, for the most part, if I wasn't allowed to leave the U.S. anymore, I mean, it would be a pain because I like to go to international conferences. But would it really affect me all that much, right? And you take a look at you take a look at the some of the laws, like right here in Texas, right now. If you want to access certain kinds of adult material on your computer, you can't do that in Texas. Now, there's hoops you have to jump through. You have to show a driver's license, and that driver's license has to be recorded. But did we see a mass exodus from Texas because you can't see adult material? No. So a lot of times people just kind of accept authoritarianism, right? They just kind of go, all right, well, I got to pay my bills. I have to go to work. I have to take the kids to baseball. That's just kind of the way it is. And you just kind of roll over on that. So I think that it's very easy for people who are outside of the West to look at Putin and go, yeah, he's a dictator, but the country is united, the country is strong, and that person seems to share family values.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. There's a lot of so-called alignment with certain values of certain people in the U.S., which is, at least from us over here in Eastern Europe, it's very clear that that's just a massive trolling effort. But some people can't necessarily see that. But let's keep on. We'll get more into the disinformation, misinformation track here in a second. But still on the Russian point, it seems like we're coming back into a Cold War type thing. We've talked about this a lot with China, in the mainstream press. But it seems like Cold War, Cambridge Five, Oleg Gordievsky, these stories that were around and pretty prominent, people knew about in the Cold War days with Russia. They could be coming back either with China or again with Russia again. And I'll frame the question as kind of a framing of my first question, but I feel like, we had the Internet Research Agency, which had come to light, a few years ago, especially around the 2016 election. We had the Mueller report. It said specifically that the Russian influence in that election was illegal and occurred in a sweeping and systemic fashion. But because of the political sort of situation around Trump and whether there was collusion or not, and they didn't establish any collusion, that sort of took the main attention of that report, from my opinion. And where the real damage, which is just there all the time and it's constant and people don't think about, is that there absolutely is a foreign adversary. Of course, I'm focusing on Russia at this point, that has done election interference from 2016 on, probably even earlier. And absolutely, they have assets out here today. They're doing everything they can to affect American democracy in the way that they want to see it affected. Do you think Americans actually are aware of this threat?
I don't. And I think it's because we've since we get a lot of our information in silos, we tend to lack any kind of ability to look for other sources of information. And if a certain type of information agrees with you, you agree with a certain kind of information, it is very easy to kind of lock yourself into a certain way of thinking. And one good example of that is Project 2025. It's a document. The Project 2025 was a document that was put out by the Heritage Foundation, which is this conservative think tank. And every year they come up, or not every 4 years, they come up with a template for how they want to run the country if a conservative president gets elected. And usually the conservative presidents just take a look at the judicial appointees that the Heritage Foundation suggests, and they kind of go off that list. But this particular document, if you read it, there's some things in there that are a little wacky, like banning all pornography, right? Like that, the Supreme Court might have a thing or two to say about that. But there was an infographic that came out that was essentially full of lies about the document, where it would say things like Project 2025 will ban the teaching of slavery, teaching about slavery in public schools. That was a complete lie. Or Project 2025 will prevent people from purchasing birth control. That was on an infographic, and it was a lie. It's nowhere in the document, not a single place. But if you happen to think that President Trump is the devil incarnate, and you believe that the Republicans are colluding with the Heritage Foundation to create this Handmaid's Tale type environment if President Trump wins, and it is very easy to look at that infographic and go, yeah, I believe that the government would ban birth control if President Trump is elected, so I'm just going to share this with people. Even though you didn't read Project 2025, even though banning birth control, I tell you, the Protestants fought the Catholics for 500 years, right?
Yeah.
And Protestants love birth control. Catholics not so much, right? So I don't really see the Protestants coming down on the side of a Catholic viewpoint here. But I can tell you that if you choose not to think critically, then it's very easy to allow yourself to get fooled. And Project 2025, this one specific infographic that was viewed, I think 4.7 million times, it was spread by this Democratic operative. It's very easy when you already agree with something to kind of spread more misinformation because it aligns with your worldview. So what Russia is doing right now might not necessarily be detected by the average person, because if you agree with it, why would you say no? You think, hey, this helps my candidate. Hey, this helps my team, so I'm just going to kind of go with it, even though I know it might be a lie. Well, one good example, we've seen a lot of AI generated pictures of President Trump doing things like wading through water, during the Hurricane Helene, or fixing power lines, right? And people intentionally created these AI fakes, not because they wanted other people to believe it's real, but almost like as a meme. And what you're basically doing there is you're priming the pump. You're creating this acceptance that what you're looking at isn't real, but you're going to share it anyway because it's funny. And so that creates the normalization of misinformation through AI generated images. That's terrifying when you think about it.
Well, we saw a sitting congressman, retweet that picture of the girl in Western North Carolina who was on the raft, but he clearly thought it was a real picture. And then it wasn't even a particularly good AI generated image. But to your point, the goal of these campaigns is to breathe enough life into the narrative or into the infographic or whatever until it takes on a life of its own, until someone real with a real following captures it.
That's the ultimate goal. Yes.
But can you talk about the first mile, right? So how do you emplace that narrative? How do you build the infrastructure around it to try to breathe that, initial life into it?
There's a couple of ways you can do it. The first is through what I call Sentinel Twitter or Sentinel Telegram. And that's where you have your network of bots, and a bot can be a person. It isn't necessarily robotic. Sometimes people think that bots are automated. They can be, but a lot of bots, it's actually cheaper and easier to use actual honest to God people than it is to develop an AI system that can work perfectly every time. People understand nuance, they understand humor, they understand whatever. Bots, you can program them to do certain things, but eventually it's not going to come through as authentic. So typically you have these Sentinel accounts. So these Sentinel accounts, they might only have 24 followers or something like that. They're Twitter, they're on Telegram, and this is where the misinformation starts. Now, other accounts that help seed this information, they view these accounts periodically, like once a day. This creates this level of plausible deniability. It seems like everything was a grassroots effort when really it was seeded by these Sentinel accounts. So these Sentinel accounts will put stuff up. The seeding accounts grab this information, they post it. And the next thing they do is they see what works. They stop and they see what works. Are regular people, as in not bots, retweeting this information or repeating this information on Facebook or whatever? If they are, then you go to the next phase, which is amplification. That's where you use your major bot accounts with a lot of followers to amplify this message. If they aren't using this information, then you kind of let it die. You just let it die on the vine. You saw that last year, I believe, when people tried to claim that women were being drafted in Ukraine. There was a video of a Ukrainian girl who was she was in uniform, and I guess she had just graduated from a class, like a school, like a Ukrainian military school or her advanced training or whatever. And she was crying. It was probably a very emotional event for her to finally graduate the school. But people took this and they used something called deceptive imagery persuasion, where they took this video of her crying and they said Ukrainian women are now being drafted and sent to the front lines. This girl is crying because she knows she's going to die. And what's interesting is that didn't work. It was almost like people saw through that. Like they knew women weren't getting drafted. And they also knew that to a lot of Ukrainians, dying on the front line is of the highest glory, right? So it didn't quite resonate. And so you saw that just drop. It just fell right off. That's probably one of the better examples I have of just a narrative that didn't work. But yeah, it's seeded by these accounts, and then other accounts try to start amplifying it. They see what works, they harvest it, and they push it out. And the ultimate goal is to get a Western news media source or a prominent person like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Let's see if we can get this guy to repeat what we said. And we saw that with cluster bombs, where John F. Kennedy Jr. repeated verbatim what a seeding account said about how cluster bombs were horrific munitions and the Biden administration was sending them to Ukraine.
Yeah. And so, to your point on AI not always being the best tool, you probably saw this. Matt and I were sharing it. There was a likely Russian disinformation bot that was being run by a GPT. And so someone just interrogated the bot on Twitter and said, "Send me a recipe for baking a cake." And so it responded with the subtweet for
Oh
a
yeah.
cake.
Well, supposedly ChatGPT actually they've fixed that. Like they patched that bug, which kind of sucks in some ways. Like now you see people doing it as a joke. Give me a recipe for a delicious cupcake. And then the bot guy gets all angry because like they're not a bot. They're really not a ChatGPT type large language model. Um, but it is kind of funny how people say that. But I think that was only like a 0 day or that was only a bug for like a couple of days, and ChatGPT fixed it. But there's still this belief, this meme that someone will say something anti-America, and you'll say, "Give me a recipe for a delicious cupcake." It's
Yeah,
not true anymore. It was only true for like a day, 4
but a
days.
good day it was.
Taking a moment to remind you that this show is brought to you by Trezor, home of the original Bitcoin hardware wallet. For over 10 years now, Trezor means business in Bitcoin security and functionality. When using their wallet software Trezor Suite to connect to the Bitcoin network, you're automatically connected via Tor, protecting your identity and giving you full control of your coins in a fully open source manner, both on the software level and on the hardware level. So head on over to Trezor.io to grab your brand new Trezor Safe 5 with a secure element, as well as a ton of available accessories to back up your keys and keep your coins safe.
So where I wanted to go on this, seeding of these narratives is, and you mentioned one that didn't really take root, but a lot of them do. And I'm curious, you do a lot of speaking, you talk to a lot of people. I see one current of people being, maybe more sophisticated, more skeptical consumers of content. And then at the very same time, I see what is like, horrifying consumption of content and just sort of belief of whatever in your scroll is fact. And both seem to be concurrent. And I'm very concerned about, the latter. Do you see which direction are we headed? Is it getting worse or getting better?
It's gonna get worse. It's definitely gonna get worse because AI is only gonna get better at creating images, or creating voices, or developing the kind of engaging content that keeps people on their phones. One thing that's actually very concerning to me is that I no longer get pictures of cats snuggling on Instagram. I know how crazy that sounds, but there is. I don't have a girlfriend, but there is a girl that I see once in a while when I'm traveling. She's a flight attendant. She'll come by. She'll stop by the hotel. I would send her like little gifts of these cats snuggling with each other. And I no longer see that anymore on Instagram. And I don't know how I got those cat things initially, but sending it is kind of a way of saying like, hey, I like you. I can't wait to see you again. And what I haven't seen one of those animations or one of those graphics in a couple of weeks. And that kind of bothers me because my guess is that it is election season. And so Instagram, or Meta, I should say, is trying to cram as much political content into your phone as humanly possible. And I don't scroll Instagram all that much. Normally, I just go on it and I'll view what people have written me. But the fact that those cats aren't there anymore is kind of concerning because I like seeing those cats and sending them to this girl. But I think there's only one way to go, and that is down. That is toward misinformation and low analytical information consumers consuming this stuff and believing it. Also, don't forget, like for the average person, look, not everybody's like me. I mean, I have a book that I'm reading right now on the Roman army versus Greek armies. You know, the Roman phalanx versus or the Greek phalanx versus the Roman army. You know, the Roman Histari Triarii Principe, Histari Principe Triarii. And the fact that I can like just say this stuff off the top of my head tells you a lot about me, right? I'm reading a book right now about the 4 battles where Greeks in a phalanx fought the Roman military with their formations. And like but not everybody can do that, right? Like people, they wake up, they scroll on their phone a little bit, they brush their teeth, they go to work, they come home, they watch a little TV while they're scrolling on their phone, they go to bed. What chance do we have? Right? Like how if someone worked all day, they worked 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours at work, and now they got to come home and they have to think. Screw that. So I don't really know how to fix this unless it's on the supply side because the demand side is there. There was a woman, Liza Schlesinger. She's a comedian. She had a Netflix special. She just recently become a mom. And she's talking about TikTok, how like at the end of the day, her husband, she's lying in bed, her husband, is trying to like talk to her, and she's on TikTok, and she goes, I have earned that TikTok time. Like she just wants those 15 to 30 minutes where she doesn't have to think and just consume. Problem is this passive consumption of information might have misinformation in it, and you are seeding information into your head, which isn't real during your passive TikTok time.
I would say you're almost guaranteed. If you scroll TikTok for 30 minutes, you will see misinformation or disinformation.
Yeah, the only way we can do it, the only way we can fix it is by cutting it off on the supply end. But we have freedom of speech in this country, right? And it's a little tougher to deal with those issues when, it's not like you can go and sue YouTube because we've already exempted some of these organizations from being responsible for the content that people create. Right? I think that's been the case since 1994. I think there was a law that was passed. I want to say it was the Communications Decency Act, but I don't quite remember. But it basically held harmless any internet providers and by extension social media providers from the content that people produced on their platforms.
Yeah, they're platforms, not publishers, I think.
Yeah.
This is an interesting point back to the real adversaries that are out to harm what Americans are doing in America's liberal democracy. Because, for example, Russia, for example, China, the content that is seen on those platforms, if it's TikTok in China, it's vastly different than what Americans see. Much more productive, educational for them. In Russia, these things are just outright banned. I mean, there is no freedom of speech in Russia. Same with Iran. North Korea, obviously, famously doesn't have much of anything. So, not so much what do the companies do, but specifically for what America can do on a big macro level against adversaries who are literally weaponizing platforms that are for their freedom of speech. That's like you said, that's only going to get worse, it seems.
Yeah. Well, step one is if they're foreign born, and I've advocated this, if these are foreign adversaries that are working at a disinformation factory, what we do is we kill them. And I'm very serious about that. we put a bomb through their window, we blow up their building, or we hunt these people down one by one and we kill them. And I know that sounds like a psychopathic thing to say, but I can tell you this: if somebody wakes up in the morning and they go to work at a munitions factory, are they a valid target? Absolutely. They're working at a munitions factory making bombs. Those bombs might be dropped on an American bridge. Now, you need to think of weapon systems in terms of effectors as opposed to weapons. So why do you buy a bomb? You buy a bomb because you want to use it to destroy a bridge. Why are you destroying the bridge? You're destroying the bridge because you want to deny access to the bridge by the enemy, right? So what if you could hire a bunch of weak-minded college students to shut down the bridge? We're going to shut down this bridge because Israel are colonizers. This, I think it was like the American Arab Coalition for Peace. Last year, they convinced a bunch of people to go into the port of Long Beach, enter the port, and glue themselves to the MV Mavi Marmara, which was a U.S. supply ship in the Merchant Marine or Naval Reserve supply ship. I forget the exact term. I am not a mariner. I'd have to look up the actual information. But essentially, the MV Mavi Marmara was a reserve fleet ship. And this particular organization claimed that they were carrying weapons to Israel. And those weapons were going to be used on innocent Palestinians. Now, I don't think anybody actually looked at a map because the Port of Long Beach is in California. And if you're going to go to Israel, you would go out of the eastern United States, right? Because it's a very long way around the Pacific. And right now, the Panama Canal has really low water levels, so not a lot of ships are getting through. But apparently nobody looked at a map. They were just told this ship is going to Israel with weapons. You need to glue yourself to it to prevent it from leaving. And people did it. That's a weapon. Now we have a weapon. That is a weapon system that prevented a ship from moving that would be no different than if someone placed a mine on that ship and blew it up and kept the ship in port until it could get repaired. That is a weapon system. What do you do with people who manufacture weapon systems? You kill them. That's what you do. You kill them. And so that's one of my arguments that I've given to people when I've spoken at various conferences, that we need to start killing these disinformation artists. During time of war, you can do that. You can't do it to Americans in America, but you could certainly do it to foreigners. And if you want to work at that disinformation factory, knock yourself out, but you're going to be treated the same way anybody who makes a bomb at a munitions factory will be treated. So that's one way of fixing that problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're overstating the problem at all. So, who's the apex predator in the disinformation game? We talk a lot about Russia, but the Chinese throw a lot of people at it. The North Koreans are in it. The Israelis are in it. The Iranians are in it. We're in it, right?
Russia's probably the biggest apex competitor, followed by Iran. China is kind of, I would say, they're third. North Korea really isn't that much of a factor. They're very ham-handed when it comes to stuff like this. And really, North Korea is more focused on disinformation operations in South Korea. Like, for example, if someone says, "Hey, the Kim Jong Un is short," and someone in South Korea says, "Look at how short Kim Jong Un is," North Korea will they might put out a video showing how tall he actually is, filmed from angles that. So they're more concerned with what South Korea is doing, not necessarily America. I think probably the biggest attack on America was after that Seth Rogen movie, The Interview, came out, where North Korea hacked Sony and did release some stuff with Sony Pictures. I think that was in 2008, maybe. So Russia is the apex predator. I think a lot of that just might be their English skills. And also, Russia has a lot of good software engineers, a lot of good tech people. Iran would be a close second. And I would say that because a lot of Iranians have gone to the West and they've studied in the West. So they've gone to schools in Germany, or they've gone to schools in France, and they've learned English there, and they've come back and they've been able to establish these disinformation campaigns. China, look, I probably get once every 2 weeks and probably about every other day, someone in China is sending me a text message of a pretty girl saying, like, "Hey, I missed you. Do you want to talk?" Yeah, they're just, and like they're trying. It's like, come on, guys. Like, you need to get better at this solicitation. If you sent me, if you tried to pretend to be a woman who is 47 and a smoker and a little overweight, yeah, I could see her interested in me. But like, not a 26-year-old Chinese girl. Like, dude, come on. I'm almost 50. Like, I know there's nothing I have to offer there.
Part of the training is always that know what league you're in.
Yeah, I mean, look, I did the whole I do my security briefing stuff every year, and yeah, you gotta know what league you're in. Like, some 26-year-old Chinese girl is not going to be interested in.
Yeah, but it works. So here's a question in the macro sense. It seems like there are certain tropes that are that provide great fodder for disinformation. And so, like, COVID and vaccines was one, elections is one. You've talked a little bit about, or maybe a lot about, disaster response and recovery as being what I thought was really interesting. Do you care to comment on those tropes, and why are certain subjects, a great breeding ground for disinformation campaigns?
Well, I think when it comes to disaster, what you have is an information vacuum, right? So, in any kind of situation where there's an information vacuum, people are going to appear to fill the explanation for that information. And one example, if you look at the Maui wildfires, like, how many people really know someone on Maui? You two probably don't. I don't know anybody who lives on Maui. I don't know a single person who lives on Maui. But because of that, since most people don't know anybody who lives on Maui, you can come up with misinformation very easily, because it's not like you can call your friend on Maui and say, "Hey, is this true?" Now, it doesn't work so well in places like New York City that has 8 million people. You say, "Hey, is the active duty army patrolling New York City and rounding up conservatives to put them in camps?" You probably know somebody in New York City you can call and say, "Hey, is this happening?" No, no, I was just out getting Thai food. No, we're fine. So when it came when it came to the hurricane in North Carolina, one of the issues is that you kind of had this perfect storm, so to speak, of people who were angry at the government just in general because they don't like who's currently in office. So that was number one. Then you had things that actually happened, which were in Western North Carolina, people carry guns. I carry a gun. I carry a gun every day, and when I travel in Maryland and Virginia. But some of these people who carry guns were walking up to FEMA officials who just entered their town, and the FEMA officials were going, "Get the hell away from me with that gun." And that turned into FEMA is denying aid. Now, the issue there is with FEMA, not with the people, because these FEMA people should have been taught, like, hey, people have a Second Amendment right to carry a firearm in this particular, well, they do in general, but in this particular state, culturally, people carry firearms. You need to be okay with that. And it was the National Guard. It was the North Carolina National Guard that was actually diffusing those situations, because a lot of guys from the Guard were from Western North Carolina. They grew up like that, and it's a perfectly okay way to grow up. But if you have some FEMA guy from New York or San Francisco, they're going to see someone with a gun and go, "Get out of this tent with that gun." And now FEMA is denying aid. So there was that narrative that was also being pushed. And I also think that there is this other narrative of performance theater where people really wanted to go to North Carolina with their own truck or their own helicopter or their own drone and help, and then put that on the internet. And so when they go and there are local police that are saying, you can't go down this road, it's washed out, that turns into the police are not allowing us access. So since nobody in the affected areas has a cell connection, unless they have a satellite phone or a ham radio operator, that vacuum of information turns into, hey, we were turned away. The government isn't letting people into North Carolina to help. So a lot of the issue comes from this whole information vacuum. And one major failure is that initially the National Guard and the state of North Carolina did not push back on that information, probably, or that misinformation, probably because they were too busy dealing with hurricane response. But I think in the future, we need to have literally offensive public affairs officers that can anticipate these problems and deal with them in real time to get the truth out.
I want to ask you one more about Russian disinfo, of course, but the Tenet media story was one that I definitely wanted to get your take on. A month or so old at this point, but in my opinion, this is just has to be one small example of a larger template that the Russians do, and it's indicative of how much money they're willing to spend. You can say a lot of things about that story. I don't even want to make it about left or right or who the characters are, but it's clear to me, again, in line with my earlier questioning, that this is a pattern. Everybody should know it's a pattern. I don't think Americans even understand that it is a pattern. I watched a lot of the left-right YouTube podcasts, chats, shows, whatever, trying to talk about this issue. And a lot of them weren't even focusing on the fact that it is a very dangerous adversary that is paying, excess premiums, as opposed to what these people are actually worth. And it's not actually even the story. It's not the center of the story there. So I guess my question is, can you give any other examples of some templates like that? Or, I know you can't divulge other things that you might know that are classified or whatever, but this can't be a standalone incident, and I think it's going to keep coming out. What do you say to people that follow you and watch you about these things? How do we educate people about this stuff?
That's so the first thing I usually say is, if something makes you feel emotional, don't share it. You're probably being manipulated. If you read something or you see a picture and it makes you really mad, or it creates some sort of emotion inside of you, then you need to stop what you're doing and don't share it. That's on the front end. There's not a lot we can do on the front end, mainly because, look, I'm in a hotel right now. When I leave this hotel and go downstairs for breakfast, I'm probably going to take out my phone and I'm going to just kind of take a look at Twitter, right? I'm just going to say, all right, what's on Twitter right now? And I might see something that's a little inflammatory, but I don't necessarily have the time to investigate that, right? I have to have breakfast. But you multiply that times however many times a day you look at your phone. And I want to say, I think I had read a study that said the average person looks at their phone 8 times every minute, which is possible. Maybe not when you're sleeping, right? But I believe that statistic, right? That sounds like, and actually, what's interesting is I'm actually looking at my phone right now. Where do you find that? It's is it not statistics? It's screen time, right? Screen time on my phone. So I'm going to look at my screen time statistics right now. Showtime. I got it right now. So if you if you're tethered to your phone all day, but you're also doing other things, then I could easily see how you might be misinformed, but you're on to the next article or you're on to the next post. And I look at my mother, who I've talked about this before. My mother watches CNN all day. She is probably the most misinformed. Sorry, Mom. She's probably the most misinformed person I've ever spoken to. And it's not just because she watches CNN. It's because you can't watch CNN all day. You're doing other things. She's on her phone. She's cooking breakfast. She's, so you're half watching CNN and you're half doing other things. And because you can't give it your full attention, you're not getting the full story. So you might only be picking up bits and pieces. And that's why it kind of turns into what's going on in Ukraine? Why are we sending troops? We're not sending troops, Mom. We sent some Patriot units. That kind of thing. Because if you're not paying attention, you can't necessarily get the full story, right? So yeah, I mean that's the front end. I think honestly it'd be a lot easier to fix stuff on the back end just by telling companies, look, someone can't forward or repeat something. If someone wants to repeat something, they have to pay 10 cents. A tax, maybe a tax, or you can say to a social media company, if you have over 1 million subscribers, you can't retweet or repost something more than once an hour. That would help cut down on misinformation content being forwarded, right? Or requiring that people pay might not work because Russian disinformation companies, they have plenty of money, right?
Yeah, they've
When
shown
you
the
talked
pockets are
about,
deep. Yeah.
yeah, their pockets are pretty deep. And when you look at something like Tenet, I know you mentioned Tenet Media. What's crazy is that the level of money for the quality of content was really poor. And I watched some of the Tenet Media videos, and they're literally doing reaction videos. It's actually something I don't do, which I consider it cheap to do a reaction video, to just watch a video and pause it and then talk, and then watch a video and pause it and then talk. It's a very cheap way of doing things, and I can see why they did it that way, because it's very easy to put out content. Like if you have to do 3 shows, if you have to do 3 shows a week, uh, it's a very easy way to fill up your meter, so to speak, and you're getting mid rolls. So you're every 8 minutes you have an opportunity for YouTube to show an ad. So I think that the Tenet Media thing was a long-term investment. It was designed to create the facade of independent journalism, and they were thinking long-term, because a lot of people said, "Oh, this guy, he only got 60,000 views, but he was being paid $100,000 an episode." Now, but you grow that model, right? And then in 4 years, look, the whole reason that President Putin chose the Republican Party to target as opposed to the Democrats was that Hillary Clinton called him a tyrant in 2001. She said that he lost his election in 2001, but he's a tyrant, and he stuffed the ballot boxes and the election wasn't fair in Russia. So at that moment, that's when President Putin decided Hillary Clinton would never become president. And so they built this infrastructure that came into play in 2016. Now you still have all this infrastructure lying around, right? You still have these fake Christian organizations that put out memes that were created by Russia. You still have these these public forums, or these organizations that were created by Russia that people belong to. Why not keep going? Right? What are you going to do? You're going to throw everything away and do it on the democratic side, which is something that actually China does, specifically with environmentalism. If there's one thing that China wants to push right now, it's climate change, which is certainly real, but China wants to push that at a local level, because one of the things China does not want is America mining any rare earths inside of the US. So if you want to make some money right now, I strongly suggest that you start a grassroots organization that's dedicated to prevent a cobalt mine or a rare earth mine from being built in your town, because China will be more than happy to write you a check. as a local organization. Under the guise of, well, we don't want those trucks rolling through our neighborhoods, right? So you're thinking, oh, I don't want these trucks rolling through our neighborhoods, but China is thinking, we don't want America to be able to mine rare earth metals because those could be used in components for weapons or technical components, which could be sold in the open market. We want to do that. So China's actually kind of filling up the left. They want the left to build as many windmills as possible, as opposed to dig. And sometimes you need to dig. So yeah, China has the left pretty much wrapped up.
The one of the issues that comes along with trying to talk about these subjects is if you call out what looks like a disinformation campaign or what looks like paid content that is masquerading as organic media or whatever, it somehow gets lumped into implying that you have a political valence to your comments. So Trudeau goes on and says that Tucker is getting money from RT or whatever it is, or Tim Walz is being accused of being a pedophile or something. So to me, it's important that we call out all of the disinformation wherever we see it, but you can only call it out one at a time. And you do this all the time, right? So like, how encumbered are we with like the political implications of just calling it like we see it, right? And does that blow back on you as you're calling things out?
It does sometimes. I mean, I work for Newsmax. I work for a conservative, media publication, right? And I get crap all the time. I get like, hey, you're a shill for the Democratic Party. I work for Newsmax, dude. Like, what do you want from me? How much more? I work for Newsmax and I carry a gun. Like, what are you? Just your average gun-carrying Newsmax working liberal here, right? And I think that it's important to point out disinformation wherever you see it, and you just have to have that strong stomach. You can like me or you cannot like me. I don't care. I have enough followers that there's a cadre of people that believe in me enough that they're going to watch no matter what I say. And I got a lot of crap for doing that video about the misinformation from Project 2025. How dare you? I'm unsubscribing from you. When did you become right-wing MAGA, Ryan? Like, dude, it's not true. The document is not true. Yeah. And there was this cognitive impediment that a lot of people had to get over to understand that someone who didn't read Project 2025 made this infographic specifically to make you mad. And just because you want to believe that Republicans would ban birth control if they get into office doesn't mean it's actually true. And I don't care what political party you're in, a lie is a lie.
Agreed. And so one of the stories that I thought was so interesting was when Tucker goes and gets the interview with Putin, and he's in Moscow, and while he's there, he has time to visit the grocery store that's so cheap and wonderful, and the subway stations with the chandeliers, and he swings through and sees his buddy Viktor Orban on the way home, and so as entertaining and interesting as Tucker Carlson is, when I see that in a microcosm, I'm like, there looks like some quid pro quo there. We'll give you an interview, but you're going to do, you're going to help us with some narratives here. Do you see it that way?
Not necessarily. I mean, I was just in Germany, and I did a video about like, hey, look, you can have a beer at lunch here in Germany. Hey, look how clean the subways are here in Germany. Nobody paid me to say that. And I would not be surprised if in Russia, the subways are clean and there's chandeliers inside the subway. Prices of food, I mean, that can vary throughout the country. But also don't forget, like, I think the bill came to like $100 per person. I think Tucker's whole crew went, so it kind of ended up being $400 total? $100 per person for food. And maybe that's a little less than what you get in an American grocery store. But it wasn't like this is, oh my God, look how cheap this is. But also keep in mind, like the average Russian only makes like 47,000 rubles a year, something like that. And I haven't done the math on that, but I think that's trying to think where the ruble is right now. The
100
ruble
to 1.
is worth less than a penny. Yeah, 100 to 1. So that means the average person in Russia is making $470 a month. or a year. No, yeah, $470 a month. That's like, you can talk about cheap food all you want, but a lot of things like consumer electronics, they're not necessarily priced based on what the market will bear. So if you are constructing an iPhone in China and you send that iPhone, that iPhone can be purchased for $1,100 in the U.S. You're probably sending it to the U.S. instead of China or instead of Russia, right? Because who can afford an iPhone in Russia except the ultra rich? So, food, which is grown locally, might be cheaper, but I wonder what the prices of consumer goods are, especially foreign consumer goods. That would be kind of interesting to see. How much does an iPhone cost in Russia if you can get it at all? It might not make any sense. Might not make any sense to send iPhones to Russia. They might be using cheap Droid, the cheap Droid phones that people use in Venezuela or something, right? Like that might be all for sale in Russia.
They don't export anything; they import all the value add stuff, and they're under massive sanctions. So yeah, it's a total different story there. Um, Speaking of Russia and Ukraine, still want to ask you a little bit, and the work that you do with Aeromed. Want to ask you a little bit about, yeah, obviously it's a huge topic, but drone warfare has obviously changed massively in the last 3 years. Ukraine is, I think, arguably changing that. Of course, there's other parts of the world where there's some drone attacks happening. Houthis come to mind, for example. But sticking just with maybe Ukraine and sort of trench line, front line warfare and drone warfare, they're saying they're maybe up to like 4 million drones next year and a run rate of production. So it's pretty wild. What are your thoughts on how drone warfare, unmanned vehicles are changing, perhaps, the matchups of certain countries, whether defending, attacking?
It's certainly something we didn't really see coming. I think that for almost 20 years during the global war on terror, the U.S. dominated the airspace, and now what we found is that small nations can dominate what's called the ground littoral. So that's that 300 meter, from 0 to 300 meters. The U.S. has some drones that operate in that 0 to 300 meter ground littoral, but for the longest time, we were concerned about drones that operate at 15,000 feet, right? Controlled by satellite. I also think that one of the things that we could see is Ukraine might be the start and the end of drone warfare, all in one war. Because it's taken us a little while, but the iteration cycle in Ukraine, it started out, they were iterating about once every 3 months or once every 6 months. Then it became their iteration cycle was once every 3 months. And now it's between 6 to 8 weeks. So Ukraine is coming out with new technologies, new drone tech every 6 to 8 weeks. One of their newest things are wire-guided drones. There's a spool of wire on the back. This drone can't be jammed. Someone is guiding it, first-person view, and the guidance commands go right down the wire. Oh, that's a way to prevent jamming. And I think what we might see before the end of this war is the fall of the drone, because we're going to have SHORAD or short-range air defenses and counter-drone munitions that are so good that you might not be able to use drones the same way you saw at the beginning of the war. And we saw this. Look, when the war started, what was the big thing? The Bayraktar, right? The Bayraktar drone. And that was a big thing for about 3 weeks until Russia figured out how to use electronic warfare to counter the Bayraktar. Now I think all the Bayraktars have either been destroyed or they're just being used for non-frontline duties. And then Ukraine started to develop these drones that would drop what was the VOG 17 grenades, these 30 millimeter grenades onto individual Russian soldiers. and spot artillery. You use drones to spot artillery. And then Russia started using their Lancet loitering munition, and they figured out how to use their Orlan 10 to connect back with their artillery regiments. That coincided with Russia getting rid of the artillery inside the battalion tactical group and moving everything to a regiment-based system where they could use mass fires by using the Orlan 10. And now we see loitering munitions and drones that can deliver multiple munitions. So what started out as a DJI drone that had a light on it, and when you press the light, that instead of lighting up the light, the 5 volts opened up a solenoid that would allow you to drop a bomb. Now you have specially designed quadrocopter drones, or octocopter drones, that will deliver multiple mortar rounds to a target. But I think in the next 2-3 years, I was just at AUSA, what we saw was everything was either drone or counter drone. So we're going to see a lot of counter UAS systems, some of which are smart. So it might be some kind of drone that flies up in the air looking for other drones. When it sees one, it fires a net at it and captures it in the net. So we might actually see the rise and fall of drones just within this particular war.
Did you see the new Marine Corps commercial?
I did not.
So it's the first time I've seen a recruiting video use the implied counter drone technology. So you have guys on the ground, and then a drone swarm approaches, and they use some kind of counter drone tech, and all the drones fall out of the sky, and it's inspiring and rah rah hoorah, I guess. But I hadn't seen that in our recruiting narratives before.
Okay. Yeah. Look, Marine Corps is always innovating. That's kind of one of the things that makes their branch so special. Marines have always been encouraged to think of solutions to various problems that they encounter. They were the first to develop close air support. They were the first to develop the Higgins boat. They're very good when it comes to experimentation. From what I understand, the Marine Corps was, for a little while, I don't know if they're still doing this, but they were going to create, Marine squads are 15-man squads, or 13-man squads. And the Marines are thinking about increasing squad size by 2. So you have a drone operator and then an assistant squad leader. And it's almost like you have a mini platoon. In the Army, that would be like half a platoon, the 15 dudes. So they're always, I don't know their status on doing that. I think they might have experimented with it and said, this isn't quite working. But it doesn't surprise me that the Marine Corps do something like that, because they are always out there on the forefront of innovation.
Very interesting, Ryan. Listen, just one more for you here regarding North Korea and Russia and Ukraine. Bring it back there. So North Korea, obviously they're sort of in cahoots now with Putin and supplying them and getting whatever food from Putin. But North Korea famously, no people get out of there alive legally, and no information gets in. It really is a unique place in the world. So for Putin to have a deal with Un of 4 brigades or 12,000 people or so, which has come out, what sort of a risk are they both taking there, particularly the North Korean regime, and what does Russia really expect to get out of these soldiers?
So I don't think that North Korea is taking a risk in sending these soldiers. North Korea has about 200,000 special forces, and they're not just special forces in the sense of what we think of as like special operators. They're probably not as good as their equivalents in NATO. But one of the things that makes an elite soldier is being told that you're elite, right? So they're probably specially fed and specially funded, and so they believe in the regime. There's jokes about, these guys, they're gonna defect as soon as they get a chance, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. I don't see that happening, because if you're at the point where you are part of a special forces unit in North Korea. You've been treated really well by the regime. You've been fed well. You've been given career opportunities for you and your family that you've never seen before. You probably come from a lineage of people that served the government well. So your dad, your great-grandfather might have fought in the Great War against South Korea and against the capitalists. So you're already pretty well indoctrinated. I mean, how often have we seen Americans go over to the other side? I can think of two situations. One was Bowie Bergdahl, right, who thought, I'm going to leave my base in Afghanistan and walk over to the Taliban and talk to them. And there was another guy who was just a jerk who just recently he ran into North Korea from South Korea. So U.S. soldier who had some mental issues. So I can think of two situations. I think back in the Korean War, one guy defected. So imagine an American defecting to the other side. That's pretty wild, right? If you found out an American defected, I think that's kind of how the North Koreans would play this. I don't really see the North Koreans suddenly defecting in mass because they are so indoctrinated in the same way that in a lot of ways we are, right? We're indoctrinated that America is the best country ever. Why the heck would we ever want to leave it? And I think that even if you're North Korean and you see things like, oh my God, the Russians have food, the Russians have running water, the Russians have this, you might not be able to reconcile that cognitive impediment for you to equate that to, I could leave North Korea and live here, right? As to what they're going to be used for, how will Russia use them? I said that I don't see them being one-on-one replacements just because the language barrier is too big. You can't just take a North Korean and plop them into a Russian unit and expect them to perform at the same level. But they'll probably be used for things like frontal assaults or to plug gaps in Russian lines or relieve a Russian brigade. The North Koreans will stay in one area, the Russian brigade will go back and they'll rest and refit and train. And they'll come back after 30 days or something. So I could see those Korean units kind of being used as replacement troops or backup troops.
Interesting. Ryan, pleasure talking with you. As we close it, where can our listeners and viewers find out more about you?
I'm on YouTube, Ryan McBeth Programming, or you can just Google Ryan McBeth or go to ryanmcbeth.substack.com.
Perfect. Ryan, all the best. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
Take care.